What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Scouting the Fins, part of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed, also part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I'm your co-host, Hussam Patel, and joining me are my other co-hosts, Coach and Eric. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Doing well. It is we're getting a little bit closer day by day, about 2 months out now from training camp really kind of opening up in full. Just getting excited for it, man. I feel it.
Yeah, I agree. We're kind of entering that time of the year where, any little bit of action you get just feels like a huge win. So some, fun stuff to talk about here from, coming out of minicamp and, getting on topic compared to some of the stuff that's been floating around these last couple of days.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of discords and a lot of butting heads between our beat reporters and content creators. Both of those sides bring different values. Some are good, some are bad. I can speak to both sides, and I will say that, being a content creator, it is hard. You got to find what you want to talk about, what's hot in the moment, and to make sure your takes are right. Otherwise, people are going to absolutely flame you. With beat reporters, obviously, there's difference. There's columnists, then there's the reporting side of it for the news, and then opinions and stuff. And then I've been in some of these media pressures, and sometimes it's hard to come up with questions to certain players because you need to be able to build a rapport, not only with the coaches, but with the players, with the communication staff of these teams. And sometimes you can just get lost in front of everything. And, kudos to both content creators like us and the beat reporters for giving us the news and information. I just think the whole argument over all of this is just very, very silly and very, very childlike.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, there are great opinions on both sides of the fence. There's great content on both sides of the fence.
Kind of like how Liam Eichenberg is the glue of the offensive line, right?
Yeah, right. I just think that, as a consumer of the content, you got to find the stuff that works for you. As a content creator, I think it's important to find something unique that you can bring to the table and attract listeners or viewers in. But as a viewer, regardless of what you want, if you want that guy that's out there, shouting about everything that's out there, if you want the guy that's, negative about everything that's out there, and if you want the guy that is just overly positive, right? It's just a matter of finding the guys that fit and just enjoying that content and not making a mess of all this.
Yeah, I mean, the entire apparatus, different portions serve different purposes. And all the purposes are equally as valid. I think, the best way to consume all of this is to kind of piecemeal it, a little bit from the content creators, a little bit from the beat writers. I think arguing over which side of it is more valid or more valuable. I mean, this is peak May 22nd portion of the offseason stuff, honestly.
Yeah.
That stuff. So,
Yeah, like what were we even talking about last offseason? Because I don't even remember what the heck what the hot topic was. But outside of that, there are definitely a few knuckleheads out there whose takes are just something else and how they respond to that. But we're not here to talk about that. Minicamp has gone underway for the Dolphins at the Baptist Training Health Complex. We had a lot of great information come through the media availabilities, and we'll get through it here soon. First off, we have Anthony Weaver here talking about Kenneth Grant and the defensive line and how they potentially plan on using him and how they actually really like him.
Phillips can stay on the field. Bradley Chubb, so proud of him because every time they attack that field, they're going to attack it with purpose and intention, right? Which ultimately they're going to get better. In this portion of the offseason, it's the only time you can invest this much time in individual technique and fundamentals. So just so proud of how those guys have attacked that. I also think we're going to be strong up front. If by God's grace, we're fortunate that Jalen Phillips can stay on the field, Bradley Chubb, Chop coming into year 2, the additions we've made on the defensive line and Zach Sealer, obviously, I think we can help them too by being more disruptive and creating more chaos for the quarterback.
So it's a key.
Eric, your thoughts on what Anthony Weaver said?
I mean, I think it it certainly echoes a lot of the sentiments that we've kind of made, and I know that there's more that he said there overall in his press conference today that I think we're going to get into. But yeah, it's definitely, listen, what excites me most about what I'm hearing in the offseason is I'm a strong proponent that the best defense is simple defense executed well. And I think that that's kind of what the Dolphins are going to be going after this offseason, moving towards, more of a man scheme on the outside with some of their younger corners and letting the safeties kind of play that deep shell and read and react from downfield, and just letting the guys up front eat and create that space for your linebackers, who are, really the most veteran laden group in the defense. And a lot of that starts with being able to get that pressure up front and generate real significant disruption with the 4 guys that you have along the defensive line. And when you consider what the additions that they've made this offseason, and the guys that they're going to have coming back healthy, they're in position to do that with just 4 and complement and take some of the pressure off of maybe the spots on the defense, or the other spots on the defense that aren't as strong or have as much experience.
Yeah, and hearing Anthony Weaver talking about some of the defensive linemen they have drafted and signed out of the draft and free agency.
About the draft process. It was a collective work of so many, just targeting the guys that we did. Really excited about Kenneth Grant and what he brings to the middle of that defense, and him just being in here, have the opportunity to work with Benito and Zach Sealer, and obviously Coach Clark. Whatever he's supposed to be at the end of the day, I promise you he will reach every bit of God-given potential. Really happy about Jordan Phillips, guy that was kind of under the radar a little bit, but the way he plays on film and just the person that he is, it's the same thing. He's going to reach that ceiling, and have really high hopes for both those kids. And then I still don't know how we got Zeke Biggers in the 7th. A guy with that size, that length, that mass to play as hard as he plays. He can end up being a steal for us too. So really happy about those 3. They've been putting the work in since they've gotten here. And just I know we'll live through some growing pains early, as you do with all rookies. But the one thing I do know is that it's going to click faster for them than just because of the work they put in.
Coach, he seems really excited about KG and Jordan Phillips, and was ecstatic Zeke Biggers was available. Like, those, all 3 of those guys are balls of clay that Weaver and Austin Clark can mold and fit into what they want them to be.
Yeah, one of the things I took out of that quote was the fact that, we made a big deal about Chris Greer's press conference and, the leaders that he listed and the ones that he left out. And one of the things I found interesting about that portion of Weaver's response was that, he talked about who KG would be working with. Benito Jones was the first one that he led with there. And not to say that Benito Jones is going to, turn into a significant part of the defense, but I think it should, he's been a bit of an afterthought. I think it kind of, maybe indicates a little bit of leadership there that maybe we don't realize. But, we know that Sealer is a great teammate, good leader. So those guys being able to work together, I think that when Coach Weaver is talking about that accelerated learning curve, he's clearly excited about all 3 of them, KG, Phillips, and Biggers. Even talking about Biggers as a 7th round pick is somebody that, he's looking to contribute this year. And you don't always get that out of 7th round picks. So I think that the combination of that room, I think the guys that you have returning in this system is going to be very valuable to, accelerating the learning curve for these new guys that we have. And, like Coach said, you're always going to have some growing pains, especially when you're putting, three rookies and, three young rookies into the same position room. So you're going to have some growing pains. You're probably going to have some assignment errors, but I think that the short-term pain that you're going to have there is going to result in some really nice long-term gains, especially as we get later into this season and they really start to get their feet under them, understand the scheme, and, Coach Weaver finds out how they all work well together and the different positions that they can play.
Eric, it seems like all three of these guys, from what Weaver has said, is that they have really, really high potential based on their work ethic, their talent, their film studies. What are your expectations for, first off, Kenneth Grant and then Jordan Phillips, and then we'll hear what Austin Clark has to say about Zeke Biggers.
Well, I think, one of the other things that it was.
Oh, we lost Eric there for a second. He's back.
I got it. Sorry about that. One of the other things that I think was interesting that we had seen was Austin Clark was talking about how these guys were kind of pigeonholed in terms of the way that they've been talked about. When it comes to a guy like Kenneth Grant or Zeke Biggers or even Jordan Phillips, kind of saying, oh, well, these guys are nose tackles or these guys are three techs. The bottom line is, I think when it comes to the way that Anthony Weaver and Austin Clark see these guys, because these guys are, first off, you're judging guys based off of their skill set. And I think a guy like Kenneth Grant, when you look at his skill set, it's a well-rounded skill set. I think he's the guy that's going to play, maybe 50 to 60% of snaps year one. I don't think it's going to be, he's going to be a guy that plays 70, 80% of the snaps. But I think you can get to about 50 with a guy like Kenneth Grant. Zeke Biggers, I think, initially is probably going to be exclusively short yardage, special teams. He's got the blocked field goals in his career at Georgia Tech. He's going to be an impact. I think he's going to be an impact guy on that side of the ball there on special teams. And then Jordan Phillips is kind of, a wild card. I think he's a guy that right now I would say is projecting to be more of a depth piece, but Anthony Weaver had really glowing things to say about him. So there's a shot he sees the field maybe a little bit more than we anticipate, especially early on. But the thing that really encourages me is it really seems like they're, the training wheels are off on these guys. And they're going to give, the coaching staff is going to give these guys as much as they can handle on their plate year one, so long as they show that they're ready for it. So I think that's always a really encouraging thing when you're looking at young players, is the opportunity is going to be there if they're willing to take it. And I think at least with Phillips and Grant, you probably see them on the field year one on the defensive side of the football. Biggers you'll probably see super situationally, but I think he'll be more special teams right away.
Yep, good analysis, Eric. And here we have Austin Clark on Zeke Biggers.
Biggers he's big.
Yeah.
The guy is, when he walked in here, KenJ Cotton, our assistant D-line coach, was actually at the East-West, I believe, which Jordan was there and Zeke. And actually KG, he just participated in the meetings. But he left and came back. He goes, look, this guy's a big ball of clay, man. And that's what I see. He's a big body, fluid mover, and he's just got to continue to get stronger in the weight room, stronger at the point of attack. And he may be able to do a few things. We're excited for him to see him work.
Why three?
All right, so Austin Clark didn't really get into too much of what Zeke Biggers is going to be doing on the field, just because of his draft round pedigree, just some of the consistency issues he has in terms of his pass rush. He's a decent enough run defender, but he needs to get his pass rush getting going. Mentioned about him getting a little bit stronger. He needs to be consistent in his push, getting into the quarterback's pressure zone. We know we've seen him utilize his length, his arm a lot on the film study we did. Coach, I know you did, and then we talked about it on our day 3 live stream. But it seems as if each guy has their own expectation of where they were drafted, and Bigger seems like a project or maybe like a puppy for them to mold for Anthony Weaver and Austin Clark, specifically for this defensive line. I mean, this is a very stacked defensive line. This is going to be a very stacked defensive front for the Miami Dolphins. They're going to be young. They're going to be fast. They are going to be explosive. And before we get to the rest of the stuff of our show, we will head to break. Make this your best season yet with nutritious 2-minute meals from Factor. Eating well has never been this easy. Just heat up and enjoy, giving you more time to do what you want. Get outside instead of prepping and cooking indoors. Factor meals arrive fresh and ready to eat. Perfect for any active lifestyle. With 45 weekly menu options, you can pick gourmet meals that fit your goals. Choose from Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto, and more. Factor powers your day with satisfying breakfasts, on-the-go lunches, premium dinners, and guilt-free snacks and desserts. It's easy to savor more this spring. Factor meals pack in the flavor with none of the fuss. Factor makes dinner much easier, and with their portions, can be a tool to get fit for the summer. I'm a customer. Alf is a customer. I'm sure a lot of you guys will also be customers as well. Get started on factormeals.com/3yards50 off and use code 3yards50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Once again, that's code 3yards50 off at factormeals.com/3yards50 off for 50% off plus free shipping. And we are back. Gentlemen, that was a lot of defensive line talk. I'm excited to see how these Factor meals actually do taste and how they end up. All right, we'll go ahead and get right back to it. Coach and Eric, we haven't seen a lot of Channing Tindle for the last 3 years, just mainly a core special teamer. Couldn't really see the field with the other linebackers. Duke Riley was over him in the depth chart. You had Anthony Walker Jr. over him in the depth chart, starting several games. And now he looks like he's behind KJ Britt and Willie Gay Jr.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Barry had some pretty interesting comments himself about Channing Tindle, being in the same system 2 years in a row for the first time. And, if you can kind of read between the lines in some of what he was saying, he did mention, he was excited for Channing Tindle to kind of have this opportunity and be able to go out there. And if there's a time for him to seize an opportunity, it's now. It does kind of, you could read into that to say that there's a little bit more urgency with Channing Tindle this offseason than there has been before. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because, the Dolphins have presumably 4 linebackers on the depth chart ahead of Channing Tindle at the moment. And then they bring in a guy like Eugene Asante as an undrafted free agent. So, Channing Tindle has the physical tools. They've shown for a while now. We've known that, but it's time for him to kind of put it together. And I think that's kind of, you're excited for the player, but it's also time to, all right, we got to go now.
Yeah, here's what linebackers run game coordinator Joe Barry said about Channing Tindle.
I'll tell you exactly what I told him. I think for Channing specifically, he's going into his 4th year. He's had 3 coordinators, 3 systems in 4 years. He had year 1 coordinator, year 2 coordinator, year 3. Weave and us came in last year. This is the first time in his career that he's gone into an offseason with the same system, with the same terminology, with the same language. So it was a little bit of a challenge to him, but it was just, I wanted to make him feel good that I'm like, what a great opportunity that you have. You're not having to have to learn a new playbook in April for the first time in your NFL career. It's the same playbook you learned last year. So if there's ever a time for you to take off, it's now.
Coach, that's a whole lot of coach speak for what I think and what I think we all know what it means.
Yeah, I mean, so, Channing Tindle coming out of Georgia, I don't think that we really viewed him as a very cerebral type player. We didn't view him as the great instincts type of guy. So that, it kind of makes sense that they would reference that for him, the fact that he has had 3 different defensive coordinators. And, we've said this about, a lot of guys on this roster in terms of this being the first time that we're going into a season with the same offensive and defensive coordinator. And for a guy like Channing Tindle, like Eric said, we've got 4 linebackers on the roster who are almost certainly ahead of him as far as the defensive depth chart, goes. And looking at his special team snaps from last year, he played in 61% of those special team snaps in 2024. And that's going to be somewhat of his calling card, of course. But like Eric said, you have Eugene Asante that you brought in as well that can, do a lot of the same things special teams wise. So in order for Channing Tindle to, stay on the roster, I think that he's going to have to show that jump in the defense to show that, there is a valid reason that we haven't seen the growth from him, being the changes in systems, right? Maybe it takes him a little longer to catch on, right? But as you're getting into the 2nd year of the same defensive system, you can't have that excuse anymore. So it's either time for him to show significant growth as a linebacker and not just a special teams guy, or risk being replaced on the roster by an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, and I think this offseason, as Coach Joe Barry put it, that this is an opportunity for him to get better. And we're seeing a bit of a scheme change in Miami. We're seeing the defensive line be the core and be the firepower for this defense. And last year, it was the defensive back room. You had talent. You had great players in Jalen Ramsey, Javon Holland, as well. Cater Kohu was decent enough. As a nickel, Kendall Fuller, when he was healthy, was able to get it done on the opposite side of the field. In the second half of the season, the defense was spectacular. They were top 10. They were the 9th best defense in terms of EPA in the second half of the season. And I think with this scheme change, with a lot of the big boys up front, and if the Dolphins do play a lot of 2 high shells, it allows for the linebackers like Channing Tindle, if he were on the field, as fluid as a mover he is, as agile as he is, as great of a guy who can burst through a hole and blitz through, he has to be able to take on bigger bodies in the offensive line, especially if the defensive line is able to clear lanes for him. And that's something we're going to have to watch in minicamp, in training camp, and especially preseason, because I believe he's going to be on the bubble and he needs to be able to show it, especially if he doesn't want to get beat out by Eugene Asante or other signings in KJ Britt and Willie Gay Jr. All right, next up, we have assistant head coach and tight ends coach John Embry speaking about some of the things Julian Hill needs to work on.
The issues, he led the league for tight ends and penalties. He had 9, but I think within the last 6 or 7 games, he played fairly clean. A couple of those penalties was him trying to make stuff right formationally. Guys weren't lined up right, and so he's trying to move back to make it right. So that I can live with, but the holding and all that was just more of him just being over aggressive. And so we've worked on some things here, and it's nothing I'm overly concerned about. And if it is, we'll put someone else in there.
With Julian and all.
Well, with Coach Embry saying that, does it make you guys feel a little bit better that he was trying to get the formation right and get guys lined up correctly?
I think it says a lot for Hill's grasp of the system, right? Something else that Embry said in that was about how the tight ends have more on their plates than any position other than quarterback. So the idea that your second year undrafted free agent who used to be a quarterback is the guy who's trying to get the formations right. Like, I think that is a valuable attribute to have in this system, to have your tight end to be able to do that, because we know that they ask that tight end, that F position, to do a lot of different things in this offense. And like Coach said, some of the holding penalties were just being over aggressive. And as a coach, you always love that, right? You want somebody that's over aggressive. You can usually dial that back a little bit as opposed to somebody that is tentative. It's harder to bring out the aggression in those type of players. But it was also kind of a statement at the end there where he said, if he doesn't get it fixed, we'll put somebody else in. So I don't think that they're going in, just blindly saying Julian Hill is the Y tight end number one, but I think he's going to get the first crack at it. But I think there's also an understanding that, look, if you don't show growth the same way we've talked about some of these other guys, then there's competition in this room, and that position is not guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer is, especially when it comes to the procedural penalties in this offense, the tight end is just going to be more exposed to those than other positions, and so it's just something that you're going to see more. It's going to jump out at you more, just because of all the motion that they use and how involved the tight ends are in that. But when it comes to a guy like Julian Hill, I have no doubt that he understands the offense. But it's really just a matter of, especially at this point, and when you're a younger player, you just got to focus on what your job is on a given play. And I understand the want to, make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. But if somebody's out of position and you get penalized trying to fix that, it's going to show up on you. And so it's just one of those things that stuff will get itself worked out. The coaches will get with the team and kind of figure out, okay, well, this is what we're doing on these plays. That stuff will sort itself out. I just want him as a young player to focus on what his responsibility is first and foremost. And then as far as the holding penalties go, that's one of those things that it's either going to improve or it isn't here. We'll get our answers fairly quickly. As far as that goes, I would rather players be more aggressive than less aggressive from that perspective. So, I think Julian Hill can be a pretty good blocker if he reins in the holding calls. But as Coach Embry mentioned, there are other capable players in the tight end room ready to go if that doesn't improve.
Yep, we'll see what Julian Hill looks like in the preseason, especially on those motions, or if the Dolphins do have new motions that they'll expose in the preseason, to see how that goes. Overall, he just needs to be consistent, cut down on those penalties, and I think we might have been a bit too harsh on Julian Hill last year as just people watching outside of that Dolphins organization. Next up was senior passing game coordinator Bobby Slowick. He was actually a potential head coach candidate after CJ Stroud's spectacular season, but then last season it just kind of hit a bit of a dud because his offense couldn't really adapt to some of the complexities they were seeing, and along with some injuries along the offensive line. Here's Bobby Slowick talking about the role and what he's going to be bringing to the offense and assisting Mike McDaniel with.
Communicated to you from Mike that your jobs will all go hand in hand?
Yeah, it's very similar to how you build the whole team. Really, it's just at the end of the day, how do we make sure everyone has clear, defined roles while also being able to help each other in what they're doing to help players go play and us go win games. So I know for me and what I've been doing in particular is kind of like I already referenced. I've known Mike a long time. I know a lot of what makes him tick, particularly as it pertains to football. So I can help in regards to just me and Mike talking, conversing. There's a lot to balance when you're a head coach and you're also a play caller. So just helping that process out, speeding that process up. And then outside of that, like just working hand in hand with the rest of the staff. Bevel's been awesome. He's let me kind of hop in the quarterback room, which I have an affinity for. I love quarterback play. I love being in the quarterback room. He's been fantastic. We've really bonded over the first month and a half, 2 months since I've been here. Me and Frank work hand in hand on a lot of things, and really wherever help is needed is kind of where I'll go, and that's really to help everybody moving forward and just keep the train rolling is really why I'm here.
Listening to him say, I know the experiences of being a play caller and a head coach, just trying to get the process streamlined. It sounds to me that Mike McDaniel knows some of his flaws as a head coach and offensive coordinator and can't really handle all that on his plate. And I think the writing on the wall was right there when Slowick said that he's here to help streamline different processes for Mike McDaniel, Darrell Bevel, and Frank Smith.
I think that, Mike McDaniel is a very detail-oriented person, right? And I think that the way that, he's got the experience as a receivers coach in the past, he's got the run game coordinator, he's got the offensive line background. And I think he has a very specific way that he wants all of those rooms to operate. And as a head coach, it's tough to peek your head in all of those rooms and make sure that everything's going the way that you want. And one of the things we talked about when Slowick came on staff was that Slowick was one of the guys that Mike McDaniel groomed to be an offensive coordinator in this league. So, Slowick knows from previous experience, not just as a position coach in one room for Mike McDaniel, he's very familiar with how Mike McDaniel wants everything to run across the entire offense. And I think that's why he doesn't have a specific position assignment. He's kind of a floater along with McDaniel that can be in each of those rooms and just make sure that things are going the way that McDaniel wants them to go. So I think, and even getting into the game day stuff, like he said, we know that's been an issue for the Dolphins in terms of getting the play in on time. I think that having a guy like Slowick there that understands the thought process that McDaniel is going through from, the time the whistle blows from the previous play until they're getting that next play in, it's valuable to have somebody that understands that thought process that McDaniel has taught Slowick already based on his experience. So I think that's going to be helpful to, move to the next play, get the play in a more timely manner. I think he's just going to be not necessarily we're not going to see him make Tua a far better player. We're not going to sit here and say that, Bobby Slowick is why Julian Hill took the next step. I think just the offense overall being a little more cohesive, a little more smooth. I think that when we look back on that will be the benefit of having Slowick in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it there. This Bobby Slowick isn't necessarily here for, the improvement of a particular player on the offensive side of the football. I think he's really here to improve the, kind of the operation of running the offense just on a play-to-play basis, like you mentioned. If there's anybody that he's really here to benefit and make better, it's Mike McDaniel. Because I think, as you mentioned, McDaniel with his background is it allows him to focus more on the macro rather than getting into the granular positional room stuff on a day-to-day basis and kind of really focus on being the CEO of the offense and of the football team, as you kind of need to be when you're the head coach. And then Slowick having that play calling experience. I don't know how it's going to look with him, kind of helping McDaniel through that process, whether it's going to be, hey, I don't know exactly what that process is going to look like. But, I think, maybe in crucial situations, making a suggestion that he likes or what have you, or just being that second voice to, hey, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, or yeah, I really like that idea. I think that those things are all valuable, especially as he mentioned, knowing Mike McDaniel as well as he does in a given situation, and kind of being that guy that can give McDaniel that second perspective. Because as a play caller, you can kind of get lost in the fog of war, mid-game where, you're just so focused and invested on the plays that you're calling that, everything else kind of becomes a blur. And I think having another guy on the staff that can kind of make those other things clear as you're in the middle of calling the plays is a very valuable asset for a guy like McDaniel to have.
It's going to be interesting.
And I was going to say, like you said, you can get into a fog in that play calling, and that becomes more apparent as a head coach trying to do it, because you have to be involved with everything happening in the game. And we remember the Adam Gase days where, the defense will be on the field and he's sitting back on the bench with his notepad, making notes. That's going to be Bobby Slowick doing that type of stuff, right? The play calling at any level of football is basically just a series of if-then statements based on the way the defense is reacting to those different motions, those different formations. And that's going to be something that, Slowick is very intimate with. I think that's going to be game day. His kind of role there is that, when the defense is on the field, right, probably still in McDaniel's ear, kind of bouncing stuff off of him, but he's going to be the guy with, eyes on the tablet, kind of developing that next then statement as far as the play calling goes.
Yeah, more so figuring out what trends are happening live on the field, how they can adjust in game, which was a little bit of an issue we've noticed, especially in the first half of games. Second half, they did make some adjustments, but it wasn't effective enough to subdue some of the negatives that happened in the first half. I mean, you can't change plays right after they happen. So it's about getting better, pushing forward. And it seems that the potential is there, that there is going to be improvement. It's more so of, can they execute? Can it be consistent? And can it be consistently good? And we haven't necessarily seen that in the Mike McDaniel era. They've started off really, really well. Injuries or something else happens, and then they just fall right back off. So can they be consistent? Can that communication be consistent? Can that same process be consistent, even with other barriers that are happening? Injuries, off-field stuff happening, or whatever else it may be. The structure, the system, whatever is there, the foundation cannot crumble no matter what happens. And we saw that in 2024. All right, folks, Coach and Eric, thank you guys for joining us today. Stick with us here on the Scouting the Fins podcast, part of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed, also on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. As always, y'all, go Fins.